start off by telling me your name.
Dolores Smith,
Okay, and where do you live?
Poplarville.
Have you always lived in Poplarville?
Since I was 12. So that, we almost count that as a long time.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your childhood life.
I was born in Arkansas. I probably was about 6 years old when my father went to World War II. So my sister and my mother and I were alone, but we lived near relatives. We lived out in the country. We had a vehicle, but my mother couldn't drive, so we didn't go anywhere until my grandparents or an uncle or somebody would take us. Of course, I grew up in Arkansas till we moved to Hattiesburg. I guess I was 9. Then we moved to Poplarville when I was 12. And, do you want me to go on with the college things? Or?
You can start talking about going to college.
I went, of course, to the public schools in Poplarville. I came to Pearl River. I then worked a year after community college before I went to the University of Southern Mississippi, Mississippi Southern College, as it was called then. Finished my degree, started working here, and then I got my master's at Ole Miss.
Okay. How long have you taught here at Pearl River?
This is ending my 42nd year,
Okay.
and I've been chairman of the business department for 26. And I've seen a lot of changes take place, I guess.
Tell me about some of the changes.
Well, when I first started teaching out here, it was in 1957. The high school, the last 2 years of the Pearl River, I don't even know, Agricultural High School, I think was the name of it, they were on campus here. And some of the students that were in the high school, if they could come here and be boarding students, so they lived in the dorms. So we had a combination, actually, of the last 2 years of high school. And then the community college. Of course, they were separate groups, but they were housed on the same campus. So that was one very different thing. I think probably 1960, early 60s anyhow, the high school was totally divided, and Poplarville had its own high school, and it was just the community college here. Also, in those early years, there were not nearly as, I guess, maybe the first year I taught, there might have been 300-something students in college, and it's well over that now. The face of the college has changed. The buildings, a great deal has changed there. With the hurricane note that we call Camille back in, August, I guess, of 1968. It took out the tornadoes, of course, as a result of the storm. Took out a 3-story dorm. But fortunately, that was the week we were just about to begin school and students were not on campus. Dr. White was president then, and as soon as he could, he went over to that collapsed building to rescue the dean of students who was living there and her high school age daughter. They were not injured. Another building that disappeared is where the old administration building is. It's currently being renovated, but there used to be, it was called Jacobs Hall. That's where the library was housed and classrooms. We used to have a bell that was rung to end the classes and start the others. That building was swept away by the same tornado. And of course, the beautiful new buildings that we have now, many of those have changed over the years. We have so much commuting, which is true in most community colleges now. A thing that is very much different. In the early days when I started teaching, very few students worked. They went to class and participated in whatever sports and those kinds of things. But they didn't work outside. At least most of them did not. Now most of them do.
Tell me a little bit about the extracurricular activities. I mean, did they always have football and so forth?
And as a matter of fact, the local people in the summertime, when they wanted to play softball or baseball games, they usually came out and used a field that was where the vocational building now is. But they've always had the band ever since I can remember. I'm sure they had it before I came. They had the band, they had football, basketball. Those were the major sports. They had girls basketball, boys basketball, and the football. That was pretty much it. Not so much intramurals in those early years, but those developed fairly soon. I worked with the cheerleaders for a number of years in the beginning. I had been a cheerleader when I was a student here, believe it or not. And then as I was an employee, I was one of the cheerleader sponsors. We'd carry them to the games. I guess the furthest trip I took was up to Boonville. That was a pretty good trip. Pretty distant away.
It's very common for students to attend college now. That's just something that people expect. When you attended college, was it common for a lot of people?
We had very low enrollment. 350, something like that. But that has grown over the years. The college added buses. That brought in a lot of people from, they even ran from Prentice and Columbia, Bay St. Louis, and they did that for a number of years. But then people began using their cars more often. It was pretty easy for the people in my high school class in Poplarville. It was a very small one. Most of them came on to school. It was quite accessible to live in the town where the first 2 years of college were available. And it was not expensive. So I don't remember what it cost, but it was way much less than it is now.
How common was women teachers?
Very common. And of course, traditionally, it's been always common here. There were women math teachers. I don't remember women science teachers in the years that I attended, but in everything else, in the math and in all the other divisions. In fact, we had a lot of men teachers as well. Sometimes a lot of places think it's more women than it is men teachers, but we always had a good many men teachers.
Concerning the different college presidents, do you remember any specific things about the duties or things that progressed as different presidents?
Yes, and as the different board changes, the Board of Trustees, of course, they're policy makers, and they would change things. I was a student under Mr. McClendon and then Garvin Johnston, and then I worked. Garvin Johnston was president when I was first hired here, and he was here until 1968 when he went to Jackson as the superintendent of education. That was a statewide elected position. When he resigned, Dr. Marvin White was made president, and he served until Dr. Alexander came. I cannot tell you, 1987 or whenever Dr. Alexander came. And now, of course, Dr. Lewis. There has, to my way of recalling, there has always been very great support for faculty by the presidents and the board. Their styles of leadership vary, of course, in how they get their policies done. But I think that's always been a very amiable thing as far as I was concerned.
When did Pearl River become open to black students?
That had to have been in the 60s because I'm thinking back, there may have been some attending earlier than then, but the greatest volume would have been after 1960 because that's when the desegregation in the public schools occurred. I don't remember if that was 60 or 61, but it was early in the 60s, possibly 61 or 62. And since that time, we've had pretty good distribution of students as far as race.
Do you think that there are a lot more black people attending college now than when they first
Oh, yeah.
began?
Mhm.
Explain the progress that computers have made.
I have to think back on the old cards we used to use at registration. There were cards that they had to process. Now you can have that, instead of having the practically immobile instrument, you can have that little small thing in your lap if you want to work with that. It has made information very much more readily available. It certainly has changed registration with the online that has happened, and I think probably the students enjoy that. It gives them the opportunity to be pretty much in full control. I just hope they'll follow the catalog's advice and take the courses they're supposed to take for their curriculum. Of course, it means getting those grades out. You know, they can access so much information from their own records. And that was always kind of complicated for them, I think, prior to
I know from
recent
personal
years.
experience that it's a lot better than standing in such long lines.
Oh, yeah. Universities during registration time and community colleges or any college, there are going to be some lines, but they have certainly been lessened with the computer.
Well, do you have any more comments that you want to make as far as being a teacher here? Or?
I've had a very enjoyable experience here. I think Pearl River is an excellent place to work, and I found it to be a beneficial school when I was a student, and I think it still serves that purpose. Students have to put out a little more effort sometimes than they want to, and I'm sure that was true when I was a student as well. Working a lot of hours complicates the life of a student. That's very true. And if somehow the student population could learn that, how to adapt their schedules more easily, I think they could benefit much more from the classwork that they have. But that's the thing people have to sometimes learn through experience. I'll be retiring this year, and I hope I'm ready for that. I enjoy working, and I've enjoyed the students and the people. I think it's a good school. And it's respected by the other universities in our states. I think that's good.
Okay, I have just a few questions to
Okay.
ask you if I can. You mentioned that you were a cheerleader and then later on the cheerleader advisor. What was the overall spirit like at a football game when you were a cheerleader?
It was really, we had high attendance at the games, students and public. The stands were almost always filled. Again, part of that goes back to not working as students, and I think that has had a great influence on that. I was also in what we call the Glee Club back then, the musical group. If there was a play on campus, I was usually in it. So I enjoyed the student. I did not live on campus, but I only lived about 6 blocks away up on North Jackson most of those years, and it was most enjoyable. I enjoyed all of that here. It was a good way to meet other students and participate in different levels of activity.
What was social life like during your time?
There was a great deal of activity in the religious organizations like the student unions and the Baptist Student Union, Wesley Foundation. There was a Catholic group some of those years. There were dances on campus, and there were band concerts. All of those kinds of things were active. We didn't really bring the high school groups in like we do now in the recruiting, but faculty in the early days that I early years that I taught here, and for some time, faculty would sometimes go to the different schools, but school schedules are fairly complex now, and most of that is left to the counseling division rather than the faculty, which is, I'm sure, where it should be.
As a student, you were here in 1952 through 1954, is
Right.
that correct? And as a student, what was the moral codes here, and how were they enforced?
Oh, wow. Let's see. I didn't live in the dorm. It might have still been about that time that girls couldn't ride in cars with fellas. I'm kind of thinking that might have been the case. I lived in town, so that didn't bother me. But in dorm students, there weren't many cars on campus to start with in those years. They came in at a certain time, and it was like 10 o'clock maybe, on the nights, or maybe even earlier sometimes. Again, since I wasn't in the dorm, I don't know exactly how rigid that was, but it was pretty rigid. A lot of people stayed over on dorms on weekends. While I was in high school and for several years in my early years here as a teacher, we had a large enrollment of Hispanics from Central and South American countries. Maybe 20 and 30, 40. One of the girls was homecoming queen one year. Most of those students were in some way connected to, I believe it was United Fruit Company that shipped into New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. And somehow their connections were that they found out about Pearl River Community College, and a lot of those young people came and then would go back to their home, El Salvador, or wherever it was. And we also had on campus, as one of the dormitory matrons, a former missionary to one of the Latin countries, so she was certainly bilingual. She helped them learn their English by being an extra teacher to them. That was an interesting thing. I remember that it snowed one year, and they went absolutely crazy like we do because they had never seen snow. That was interesting to see them learning about snowballs and things.
They require a lot? You had chaperone dances, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
And
but that was fine. They'd get up and dance too, or sit over in the corner and talk. It was good.
do you think there were a lot more social activities on campus
Probably
then?
so. And the school band would play. They had a little orchestra type that would play. So it was quite enjoyable. And then the different religious groups would have, like the BSU does now, maybe they'd have lunch or something. If they didn't have that BSU house then, they would go to the Baptist church downtown or to the Methodist church if it were the MYF for functions. Not MYF, but the...
Wesley?
Yeah, Wesley Foundation. You tell I'm Methodist when I say MYF instead of the other.
As a teacher here at Pearl River, of course you went through, you were here under 2 administrations as a student, and then 3 or...
4 now. Dr. Johnston, Dr. White, Dr. Alexander, and now Dr. Lewis.
Right. What kind of changes have you seen in the areas of how the college's overall leaning has been? I know that in 1957 or when you first started, there were very few technical trade.
Yes, and most of it actually was vocational. It must have been in 1968 or thereabouts. I guess it was probably sooner than that, 65 or something to 68, 70, when a lot of classes that community college always taught in the business department as secretarial science classes, those were moved by the state into a technical program. And at that time we had a 2-year secretarial science class. We had attempted a legal secretarial, but we didn't have enough enrollment in that. That only lasted a couple of years. And we had begun the medical secretarial course. And of course, when the state apportioned the monies for those to go to technical, those were moved into the technical division. And since then, the drafting, they had a drafting, but that was moved into technical. And those have developed a great deal. They were needed for employment of students in different communities. What they call now the workforce training program is kind of an extension of that, not 1-year or 2-year programs, but where state monies are used, usually at the technical centers, and ours will be in Hattiesburg, of course, to specifically train people for maybe a new program in a factory that's already working or a company that's already working. And that's done specifically for that particular job, fairly short term, but it's meeting a need again in a different way. We've had a lot of change in extension or expansion as well in academic. Lots of changes in kinds of courses that are available and different majors now that you can take that were not even heard of in previous years. So it's good to have expansion in both those areas.
As business chair for the past 26 years, and then as a member of the business department for the past 42 years, how would you say that this has evolved? Now, this is your chance to talk about your department, and this is something that will probably be lost unless it's written down or recorded, and hopefully.
Well, of course, during the first year I came out here, as I said, we had the secretarial science courses, and we even had a 1-year secretarial course. Then we had the basic courses that we now have for transfer to the 2-year program. A lot of people who took the 1-year or the 2-year secretarial science course could have transferred to the university because those were listed as academic classes, and they were. But many of those people went straight to work. Those who were majoring in accounting then, of course, or business education or economics or business administration, pretty much similar courses to what we have now as requirements. There have been some adjustments. There has been a good bit of adjustment in accounting long term, but not on the first 2 years, not much there. Long term accounting people now often go 5 years to sit for the CPA, which is a change with the certifying board, not the colleges necessarily. So you have that kind of change. And international business has opened up as for some years now as a very active area. That, of course, is going to require languages, and people will really have to get a different mindset about that. But that's necessary when you're going to deal internationally, and all businesses do that. Most businesses do that.
Have you had a student who, quote, made it, unquote, as far as a business person is concerned, or?
Well, there are a number of those. Now, naming somebody right off, one of our Development Foundation people, whose name I can't even tell, with the carpeting, he's from Petal, and you would probably know his name is, I can see his face, one of the largest manufacturers of carpet in the United States, highly successful, has been a big donor for the Development Foundation. And we've had several of those who've taken our classes and have excelled. Every now and then, more local ones will come back and tell us hello, which is good. We had a student come in the other day and tell us that she works in the business area, but she's writing a children's cookbook. And so we were excited for her. She has it it's being reviewed right now, so we're hopeful that she's successful in that. Sometimes you get off in things that are an aside, but are nonetheless interesting and still success stories for the students.
What would you say is from your time as a student and then again from your time as a teacher, what would you say was the biggest or most radical change here on campus that may have been an event that caused it, or it may have been a transition, but what's the biggest change on campus between the time that you started school here as a...
I would guess that probably the biggest change is the fact that you have now Pell Grants and the government loan, all of those kinds of things that are available. And then the Development Foundation and its fundraising, we never had things like that. I think the government funds have made students have certainly more opportunity to go to school. I have a feeling that we would have a very uneducated population as far as college if we didn't have those government programs. I just feel confident that's one of the biggest things. And it was to a benefit for the students.
Do you remember what tuition was when you
No,
began?
I do not, but it was just like minimal, what, $75 or $100 a semester maybe, you know, and then you rented your books, so it wasn't anything to speak about. Of course, the money incomes weren't that high back then
Right.
either, but it was affordable for a lot of people, you know. I'm sure there were those who couldn't, because you always have that. But that grant now is very much more beneficial. And there are more scholarships now, I should think. I know there are. There were maybe the high school valedictorian, but now you have the salutatorian and maybe 6 or 8 per school. So all of that scholarship type thing or availability for funding is much changed.
During your years as teaching, and they say that nothing ever changes, it always remains the same, but have you seen an overall change in the students themselves, fundamentally, not necessarily superficially, but fundamentally? Have you seen a change in the students themselves between 1957 and today? Maybe in their work ethics, or...
I keep thinking that possibly, I guess every year or every semester, I, at some point in time, think there's not enough concentration on studies. There's not enough, there's more an idea of last minute kind of preparation rather than working along. And I'm sure you had some of that anyhow. It just seems like it's more abundant.
There's more to capture their attention today than there was 20, 25 years ago.
And I'm a traditional teacher, so that's another thing. You know, not as much of the video, but doing things in class that lecture and working with that theory and that kind of thing. So I'm sure that can make a difference too in the reception for the student. But I find that the writing skills compared to earlier years may not be as strong as they might need to be. Not as complete in concept. But basic writing skills seems to be a problem in many instances. Certainly not for everybody, because we have some excellent writers and excellent students.
You think it's a communication skills problem? It may be because we have the television and the radio.
I think that's a great
everything
influence. I
else.
can see that in my own son, and I think so.
Well, I want to thank you for
Well, my
contributing
pleasure.
your thoughts and your memories to
Thank you.
our museum history
And thank
project. And best of luck in your retirement.
Well,
I
thank
hope you
you.
enjoy it as much as you have. You seem to have your teaching.
I have enjoyed the teaching. I'm sure I will. There are a lot of things I just simply don't have time to do, and that's how people are when they work. And I would like to get back in the yard stage, working in the yard some, and enjoy that.
I think Mr. Smith has some travel plans for you,
he
too.
does, yeah. I'm having to kind of hold him back on some of those. I said, we remodeled the house. I can't be in 2 places at once, so we have lots to do.
Well, we sure do. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.